Hi, welcome to West Virginia Author. My name's Lynn Squires and I'm your host. My guest today is Kat Pleska. She's a native West Virginian and an award-winning author, educator, and storyteller. Her memoir, Writing on Comets, was published by West Virginia University Press. Kat edited 3 anthologies, and her stories and essays have appeared in the Appalachian Heritage Anthologies, Still the Journal, Heartwood Magazine, Change 7 Magazine, and many others. She teaches in Marshall University's English department and in the Graduate Humanities program. Her new memoir, My Life in Water, will be available in the spring of this year. Welcome.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
A lot to talk about with you lately. Your previous books, I just wanted to mention quickly,
Okay.
Fed from the Blade, that you edited that one.
For Woodland Press.
That's been a few years ago. I think.
Yeah. Yes.
And then Fearless Women's Journey to Self-Empowerment. That was an incredible book, I have to say.
It is.
And I will say all the stories in it were good, but my favorite part was your beginning, your introduction to the whole thing. So well written.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people skip reading that stuff a lot of times, but that's truly the...
There's Easter eggs in there, too. People should read those.
I know, right? Mm-hmm. And then you had another one, Unity, Coming Together, Falling Apart, which was also an interesting twist on an anthology, I thought. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then your own cookbook, best title on the planet, One Foot in the Gravy, Hooked on the Sauce, Recipes You'll Relish. Mm-hmm. Love that.
Yeah.
And then the new one coming out, My Life in Water, a whole book about water-related essays. Mm-hmm. Really great take on how to do something like that, I thought. Mm-hmm. And the cover, which I'm sure they're going to show here in a bit, you're actually sitting in a bathtub, which is kind of interesting.
Well, that's my headshot. This is my cover.
Oh, the cover, right.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that for a minute. That's
Okay.
fascinating, but it's AI created?
It is AI created.
How did that come about?
Well, I've been looking for quite some time for the right graphic art to put on the to have on the cover of the book and to present it to the publisher and say, is this okay? He had some as well, but I wanted to see what I could find that kind of suited me or I felt was right. And I put the question out on Facebook, and I said, what do you think? What kind of art would you suggest for this? And people suggested their own paintings, other people's paintings, some AI-generated art. There was all kinds of illustrations and they were all wonderful. They really were. But my cousin's daughter, her name is Andy Sinclair. She's been playing around with AI for some time, and she sent me one, and she said, how about this? And well, it was very close. I mean, I was like, I think you're on the right track. And then so we talked back and forth. Then my daughter suggested some elements of, well, maybe something about this, about being underwater, coming to the top or something like that. So then Andy came back with that image that you saw, the individual floating up, and it was absolutely perfect. I knew the moment I saw it, I thought, that's it. So I checked with Andy to make sure that she had the rights. She pays for some sort of AI program and creates things, and she does have the rights to it. And then she's going to allow me to use it as the cover of the book, and she'll get credit, and so will my daughter.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Perfect.
I mean, I'm worried about people saying, "Oh no, you should use human art, human-generated art," and I get that entirely. But I was a little bit under the gun to do this, go ahead and do it. And it was difficult for me to look past anything else at that point, so.
Well, I think, of course, that's a huge debate going on right now about that. But, in my mind, she did create it. She put in what she wanted to see and popped it out. So it's not like...
She tweaked it here and there. I mean, there is some
it's
human
a
element
computer
to it.
program. Whatever you tell it is what's going to come out. So you are responsible for it.
Yep.
I think that's great that it looks so good. I've played with that a bit last year for a children's book that I'm working on. Mm-hmm. And it's jellyfish in the water next to a pier, so I type all that in. Mm-hmm. And it came out looking pretty okay, except the jellyfish was up in the air. And I couldn't get it down in the water anywhere. So
Underwater,
clearly
please.
that's not my gift.
Yeah. Mine
It is a
either.
beautiful cover.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of reading a few of the items in it beforehand. And my very favorite one, I don't know how you say it in Icelandic, but Viti Island.
Video. Well, no, I don't know how it's pronounced in Icelandic. Even though I was there, I found Icelandic very challenging to read. But it's anglicized by everybody who speaks English into Viti. I don't even know what one of the letters is reference or how it's called, but yeah, Viti Island is what everybody else calls it, I guess.
Well, I've told you this before, my favorite piece that I've ever read that you've ever written. At the beginning you say, the island represented a chance to slow down. On this spit of land where nothing is, I could think of something other than what feels like my nonstop obligation to others. That must have been a tremendous feeling to be not responsible for anything but yourself on this island that
Yes.
really had almost nothing on it.
Yeah, it's just a mile square right off the, just a 7-minute ferry ride right off of Reykjavik, which is the capital. But, there were people who wrote about it in Froder's and other travel guides and say, don't go there, there's nothing there. And I was like, okay, that's where I'm going. I'm going to go right there because it is difficult when you teach full time and you write and you run a publishing business and there's all these other things that you're involved in. It's hard to get any space, any peace of mind, any just silence around you. And so that was my intention to ride over to that little island. And the other thing is here I was in Iceland on my own. Only one person knew I was there who was lending me her apartment, which I was so grateful. But nobody else knew me. And I didn't find out until after I came home that if you pass away as a visitor in Iceland, they don't embalm you.
Okay.
And they don't need to. It's pretty cold soil down there, and people are putting caskets in the ground, but they're not put in steel vaults. There's no embalming. They would have had to send me to a hospital to be embalmed because funeral homes did not do that. And that scared me after the fact. But on the other hand, I was there alone. I didn't speak the language. I couldn't read the language. I couldn't look at a road sign and say, "Oh, that's what that is." It was just, it was a challenge. It was a
It's
challenge.
like being in China,
Yeah,
it was
something
like
like
that.
that. You can't read the language either, so.
or the symbols in their
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
The trip as you're going along, you met that young woman and
Yes,
traveled
Valerie.
the island with her for a little bit, but it seemed like you found some interesting things, like those statues that were the two.
Oh, Affingar.
Yeah.
The artistic installation, and they're two uprights. They're two basalt stones, very upright, probably 8 or 10 feet tall each. And what each does, I think there's 8 or 9 of them on the
Yeah,
island.
8, I think.
8. And what you're to do is to stand on one side of it and look through them. And what it does is it frames a view, and then you're to cast your imagination in there and think of anything. I say in there that these basalt stones look like Stonehenge uprights, like blown off course, and they ended up in Iceland. But it's an opportunity to stop and to think and to, imagine, to dream, because nothing's out there but ocean beyond that.
Well, it kind of takes the enormity of what you're looking at down to
It
a
does.
frame.
To a little
I
smaller
looked
frame.
it up on the internet to see what they look like. They reminded me of upright railroad ties. They kind of have that
Yeah.
size to them,
Yeah.
at least in a picture.
They're a little bigger than that, but yeah.
And then you also went to see the Peace Tower, which I'd heard of and I'd read previously in here, but I looked that up and that was amazing.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
an art installation that only gets turned on every now and then.
It was John Lennon's idea. It was his vision. He wanted to install this Peace Tower in his garden in England back in 1969. And then, of course, they never did do it. And then, of course, he was murdered in 1980. And then Yoko Ono, eventually, I think it was 2006, I think it's in York and also in Iceland, she had this, what you call Peace Tower, established on Viti Island. And it looks like a big, round, squat water tank. You know, aesthetically, it's you're kind of like, oh. But once you get up closer on each of those squares, those tiles all around it say peace in 24 different languages. And inside that peace tower, which I was not tall enough to look down in there, but it's not very tall, there are a series of these massive Keeling type theatrical lights. They're massive. And on the anniversary of his birth, and they're turned on, and which is October 9th, I think. And then they're turned off December 8th when he was murdered. Between that. Now, sometimes they will turn them on at other times, but it's to honor his life and his death.
Well, I read when they turn them on other times, it's just for an hour.
Yeah.
It goes on and off.
Yeah, it goes straight up into the heavens until you can't see him anymore.
I thought it was fascinating that this island that's literally has nothing on it hardly had these two fabulous art installations there. And I think it's interesting what you talk about through this story is connected to your own life. You managed to connect it somehow to what's going on with you personally.
Yeah.
I love this. I mean, there's nothing about it I don't like. Read it.
Thank you.
A couple other stories that I brought with me. Where Fish Dream. Yeah. Oh my God, I'd never read this one before till today. And that's just like, it's a braided story, I think.
Yes, or segmented, either one.
It works very well with this, but you're just like in shock over the one part of the story. This family dies of electrocution, all of them at one time, and then you relate that to your parents and the
That's
traumas.
not Where Fish Dream. That is One Day on the Lake.
Okay, what did this one talk
Where
about?
Fish Dream is about the bridge falling in Point Pleasant and Gallipolis.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I read a lot of your stuff this morning. I'm all confused
They all
here.
blend. Well, that's a good thing, actually.
Yeah, I was old enough to remember that bridge falling.
Yeah.
Of course, I was a wee child back then.
Oh, I was, an infant. No, I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, you're just a wee bit older than me.
Yeah.
But we were little.
Yes, we were.
When that happened. But,
Yeah.
and I never thought about, I mean, we'd been across the bridge. I could remember doing that when I was little, going shopping
Silver
in Ohio.
Bridge between Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio.
But you lived in Point Pleasant, so you probably had the chance to go across a lot
Many
more.
times. I remember, because it's a suspension bridge, it was shaking up and down, and I kept thinking, that's not right.
Well, this is written so well, just you talking about the weight of the bridge driving people's bodies into the silt at the bottom of the river and stuff. It's very vivid. And then you switch over to talk about your family and your mom and dad and their
Collapse of their
ongoing
marriage.
trauma.
Yes.
And basically how your dad kind of drove your mom down in a lot of ways.
She did. He did.
Very artfully done. What made you decide to mix those two together in a story?
I think not sure exactly of the genesis of it, but they usually, the collapse of the Silver Bridge, December 15th, 1967, it's somebody somewhere in the media will remark on it every anniversary.
Right.
And I was thinking about that, and we used to live in Point Pleasant, and then that led me to the thought that in Point Pleasant was where my parents' marriage truly began to collapse and come apart and collapse. And so I started writing about my family at first, and then I started doing the research on the Silver Bridge. And then I realized that they're both tragedies, but of course, the 46 people who died on that bridge when it collapsed, is a massive tragedy. How, and I thought, well, do I have the hubris to connect the tragedy in my family with this massive tragedy over here? But when you are in the middle of a trauma and you're in the middle of something, relationships that are collapsing, they feel as big as a bridge collapsing. In this way that feels to you inside in your heart and your gut and your mind. And so I would write about the bridge, and then I would pluck certain details out of that to establish a connection between what was happening with my mom and dad and the marriage falling apart, what happened to me, and with the details of the bridge falling, so that one kind of echoed the other. And so you got a sense of this whole tragedy and it's not an essay that's going to end up, oh, happy, happy, joy, joy. You know, there's no
Neither
ending,
one of
you know.
them.
No, and you know, but not every essay should do that. You know, you need to take it to the end and take it to its reality and take it to its truth, and you know, walk away.
Well, again, artfully written, it went seamlessly from the bridge into your parents and back
and
again.
forth.
I didn't feel like I was switching books. It was all
right.
put together really well. And then The Day on the Lake, the one I thought I was talking about a minute ago, that was something else. I mean,
I know. It's
the
just,
whole family gone from lightning, all stand on the same tree roots. That just blew me away.
I had no idea that if a lightning struck a tree and you were standing on the roots, you think you might be safe. Of course, the roots go straight, you know, way out, you know, so you think you're okay. And then the lightning travels down through the tree and through the roots, and it killed all 5 family members. But then the braiding in with that was my dad's relationship with the young man who died in that incident, who he seemed to see as a son that he never had. And I wasn't upset about it. I could have been, but I really wasn't, because I had my mother's love. I had her attention. I mattered to her. And I guess Dad needed that, you know, kind of uncle-nephew relationship. And what I realized when I came to the end of that and realized that, you know, blood is not always thicker than water. Sometimes, you know, it flows much more, it's much more fluid. It truly was a tragedy for all of those who the family that lost them, the people who died. The young man's son was only 10 years old. And, you know, it's just devastating. And it's such a bizarre thing to happen. And I'm the one that had to tell my father about it. And, you know, he would have had no idea. I found it in the New York Times. Just a fluke that I happened to see it. You know, 5 killed by lightning on a lake. And I'm like, what? You know.
And you'd already had your daughter by this time. You were an adult when this happened, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how through all of this and how your dad seemed to be real keyed in on this young man, that it really didn't seem to affect you that much. Like you said, it's like that was kind of
I just accepted it.
His thing.
Yeah,
and
it was his thing. I wasn't real close to my dad, as you can imagine, you know, that he had a lot of issues. I mean, it wasn't that we fought or he treated me badly, other than the fact that he would disappear from time to time and leave my mother wondering if she was ever going to see him again. I mean, you know, that sort of thing. But like I said, I had the strength coming from my mother and my grandmother. And, you know, so if you've got that one person who unconditionally loves you, you can withstand anything. You really can.
True. Yeah. He's almost like a secondary player.
He really
in a lot of ways.
Yeah. When Mom passed away, it took me 6 years before I had the ability to write about her and her life. My dad passed away, and I don't mean to sound callous. I just mean that I was removed. He passed away 3 years after my mom, and I was writing about him within 2 weeks. And I don't mean any disrespect, but it was just, that was where I was, and that was what I could do, you know. And I wrote about him respectfully, you know, but I wrote the truth.
Writers write what they know.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
what they know to be truth, you know, in fact. So.
Well, I think in all of this writing, the takeaway is not only are we getting glimpses of Kat Pleska's life, but the world you live in, the world we live in, the value there is to being still and observing what's around you, and the ability to connect, like you've done so many times, what's going on in the world with how that's mirrored maybe in your own life. Do you want to read us a little something or
just a little bit.
Okay.
This piece that I brought with me to read is Wash Me Clean. And this piece has been published, but I'm using it in this collection. Norma set the baby in a clawfoot tub of warm water. She loved babies, and a chance to babysit her little niece made her happy. She smiled to watch as chubby hands splashed the water surface. Norma soaped a wash rag and washed the baby's belly, then moved to her back. She lifted splashing hands and massaged suds around the fingers. She grabbed the slippery baby and stood her up, scrubbed her bottom and her legs, and then sat her down. Rinsing the soap from the rag, she wrung the water out and scrubbed the baby's face, neck, and ears. Norma smoothed the rag over the baby's head, scruffing up wispy hair tufts. Nearly bald when she was born, the baby, now 6 months later, sported peach fuzz covered on her head, as Norma called it. Her sister Jean pretended insult. My baby so does have hair. Clicking her tongue, she said, I forgot your towel. I'll be right back. She left the baby, newly able to sit up, and stepped into the hall to the linen closet. She rummaged for the softest towel in the meager stack. Her sister didn't have much of anything. She came into the marriage with the clothes on her back. In the year and a half since, not much was added, save her child. Norma finally grabbed a towel and closed the closet door. She came around the bathroom doorway, and a jolt roiled through her body at the sight. No baby in the tub. She dropped the towel and hurried closer. There, underwater completely, lay the baby, staring wide-eyed up at the ceiling. No bubbles, no movement. And I'm going to leave it there, but I will say that the interesting thing, I mean, Norma, the aunt, was just a child herself, 17, and what did she know about babies? But I will say that she never told my mother. I was the baby.
Wow. Well, apparently you lived.
Apparently. I think, unless this is all a dream. Yeah, so
Wow.
the revelation of learning that.
And we'll have to read the book to see how you got out of it.
Yeah, many decades later is astounding. Yeah, so.
So what other kind of water stories are included in that?
Well, not everything is water per se, but it involves fluid in some sense. So there's another piece in there right after that one where I was a year old and I almost died from the strangling angel, which is a real old-fashioned term for diphtheria. And there's a heavy, thick mucus that gets into your lungs. And, I had turned blue, and there's drama that goes along with that. I witnessed, later on when I was older, I witnessed my girlfriend almost drowning in the pool. We had gone for swimming lessons. Let's see, what else? We had a couple of floods in our home. I went to a psychic who told me that because I was Scorpio, I was a water sign. And I thought, well, if Scorpios are anything, they're fire. But no, as it turns out, they are water. And she told me all sorts of things about the fluidity of water and how that affects, your life. There's dreams that I had about curtains of water. There's all sorts of ways that fluid and water and/or water. There's one called summer rain. When I would go in the cellar house, which is a little room above the cellar, and with a tin roof. And when the family got too rowdy, too loud, my uncles and dad were fighting or something like that, I would escape up there and listen to the rain. Just hope and hope and hope that a rowdy thunderstorm came up. Sometimes it did. And I would imagine that rain coming down through the roof and sluicing through flesh and bone and washing me down to the cellar below, where I flowed to the edge of the cellar wall and down into the ground and to the water table and into the well, and where family members would draw up a bucket of water, dip it into it, and drink me in.
Wow.
Yeah, so things like that.
Just a few light stories like that.
Yeah.
Did you happen to include your story about the ashes in the river in Ireland?
I did. Yes, tossing Jim over the bridge.
Yeah, that really That's worth purchasing the book for, if nothing else.
It's- oh my
I've
God, it's
related that story to so many people. Like, you would not believe how this happened.
Yeah.
So what else do you have on your slate there?
Well, I'm still working on a collection of travel essays, and it's just, I was working on that when I segued into this My Life in Water thing. And so I determined that I thought, this is what I want to work on, this is what I want to finish. And so I have. But I talked to you before, I was talking to you before about being in Iceland and being in Ireland, and I thought, I'd name it The Eyes Have It. Which is fine, but then I thought, I've never written about the time I was in Egypt. And what did you say? It could be E-I-E-I-O or something like that, if I want to throw in an O's there somewhere. But actually, I've never really written publicly about being in Egypt, and I think it's time. I think it's time, so I'll be working on that.
I'm going to have the follow-up book. I've been to Haiti and Hong Kong, so mine's What the H.
Exactly.
Well, I'm really anxious to read this new book. I know I haven't read all the stories that are in it ahead of time, but great cover, great title, and just amazing assortment of things. You guys buy this book, that's all I have to say.
It'll be out this spring.
Will it be in local bookstores, or where will we find it?
Yeah, the publisher will have it on his site. It's Uncollected Press, and Henry Stanton is the publisher, who is an absolute dream to work with. And it will be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, or whatever those things are. And it'll also be, I would imagine, in local bookshops, Taylor Books in Charleston, Book Tenders in Barbersville, and maybe up at Four Seasons in Shepherdstown, and anywhere else I can get the...
Are you going to have a little signing tour so we can come
Yes.
visit you?
Yes.
Will that be on your website so people can check that out?
It will.
Okay.
It will.
Great.
Yeah.
So you're going to do The Eyes Have It, or E-I-E-I-O, whichever that happens to be. Are you working on anything else? Didn't you have a novel in the works?
I do. It doesn't really have a name yet, but I have the character development and the plot fairly worked out. You know what the problem is? You're a novel writer. It's right there in the middle. I've got the end figured out. I know how to start, but right there in the middle. So yeah, there is a novel that I've worked. I've been working on it for a long time. I thought it was 2 novels. One time I was at a diner, and I was watching the wait staff move around behind it, and I thought, look how they're weaving in and out. Boom! All of a sudden I realized my 2 novel ideas are actually one. So they will be braided together.
2 perspectives, basically?
No, not 2 perspectives, just 2 kind of different stories. And I thought, I'm actually writing one story, and these 2 different elements will go into one book. And I thought, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but that's what happened.
So I think other places we can find you, you're going to be at West Virginia Writers Conference in June.
Yes.
Teaching some classes on memoir.
Probably memoir, flash nonfiction, creative nonfiction, those sorts of things.
That's
Yeah.
a hot market these days.
It is.
Flash
It is. A lot of
nonfiction.
literary magazines are seeking those types of
Good deal.
shorter pieces.
Real quick, do you have any advice for new writers?
New writers, I teach writing, creative writing at Marshall, and what I always tell them, do not edit yourself as you're writing. Let your heart and your mind and your gut, boom, down on the page. Look at that later. Don't lose that heat. Don't worry about what other people are going to think. Don't worry about editing. Just get the heart and the meat of that down.
Great advice. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Oh, thank you.
And hopefully we'll talk to you again when all these other books come to fruition.
I hope so. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.